So welcome to the video on hemostasis. This probably wouldn't be as long as the other one if you've watched the other blood video first. So if we look in your study guide, explain the process of hemostasis, describe how the intrinsic and common pathways work together in coagulation. And so we will be looking at all of those. And so let's go ahead and start. Vascular spasm, what's the purpose of that? Why is it the first step in hemostasis? So you can see it's the constriction of the damaged blood vessels to reduce blood flow due to direct injury to smooth muscle, either chemicals released from the endothelial cells or reflexes from pain receptors. So we want to make sure that not as much blood is escaping and that we give the platelets an opportunity to stick. If our blood is flowing as quickly as it normally flows, it's going to wash the platelets and the other activating clotting factors, and a clot will never form. So we need to reduce the blood flow first, and so that's the purpose of vascular spasm. Then the second step is how a platelet plug is formed, and so when the endothelium is damaged due to the exposure of collagen on the underside of the endothelial cells in the basement membrane, the platelets will stick, they'll swell, they become spiky, get sticky, and like I said, attached to collagen. In your textbook, there's a nice diagram that goes through platelet plug formation with all of the substances that are in your study guide, so I'm going to refer you to that because my students don't have to know it to that extent here in Arizona. So you can take a look at that. All right, and then we'll look at ways to prevent platelet activation in the blood later on in this session. Okay, then we go on to clotting or coagulation, and that there are multiple pathways. Well, there's two pathways, extrinsic and intrinsic pathways, that I will show you and then answer the questions that are found in the clotting cascade. So there are three phases to the clotting cascade. The production of prothrombin activator. By limiting prothrombin activator production, then we limit clotting. And so if we are not activating these pathways, then we don't have to worry about clots forming under normal circumstances. Hemostasis is, coagulation is such a strong positive feedback mechanism that we just don't want that to happen if it doesn't need to. And so by limiting the production of prothrombin activator, then typically we won't get clots. The second phase of coagulation then is when prothrombin activator converts prothrombin to thrombin. Anytime you see pro in front of a word or ogen on the end of a word, those are substances that are not in their active form and need to be changed in order for them to become active. So in the case of prothrombin, prothrombin activator will change prothrombin into thrombin. And then thrombin will catalyze, once it's activated, will catalyze the change of soluble fibrinogen into an insoluble fibrin, which will then allow a mesh to be formed, which will trap red blood cells and seal up the holes in the endothelium. It's important to remember that these substances are in your bloodstream right now. They're made by your liver in most cases and are traveling in an inactive form, so that as soon as damage occurs, that they can be quickly activated and then do their effects. But we don't want them to be activated right now, because then you'll get clots that will fill up your vasculature and you'll die. And we don't want that to happen. So fibrinogen is soluble, will not stick to itself, will not come out of solution, will not fill in the spaces, not stick to the platelets, and so we don't have to worry about a clot forming yet until thrombin is produced. So here just is a little diagram that shows how these steps happen. Let's see. So we'll get to the cascades in a minute. So we covered prothrombin and thrombin, and then we got the we got the fibrinogen. Okay. So we'll continue on as we go through the two different pathways. So the intrinsic pathway is one, essentially, if damage happens to the endothelium and the collagen is exposed, we're not in such a hurry to plug up the hole because blood is not leaking out. We still need to do repair, but we don't have to worry about extensive tissue injury and blood hemorrhaging going on. So we have a little bit longer time to get ultimately to prothrombin activator. And that's the purpose of the intrinsic and extrinsic pathways, is to get to prothrombin activator. So you can see platelets will stick to the collagen fibers that were exposed underneath the damaged endothelium. And then the clotting factors will then become activated. So you can see we've got factor 12 becoming factor 12A, which catalyzes 11 to 11A, which then catalyzes 9 to 9A. But notice, in addition to the activation by factor 11, active factor 11, that you need factor 7 and calcium in order to activate factor 9. And then, like we said, the platelets surfaces will allow the activation of 8, and then you'll get the 9-8 complex, and then that, fun, will activate factor 10, which then with calcium on the phospholipid surface of the platelets then cause the production of prothrombin activator after 10 has activated factor 5. Well, that's kind of a long way to get to this, and just on a positive feedback note, as more platelets stick, more factors can cling and more factors can be activated, and then we just keep doing it more and more and more, just like labor pains. Our positive feedback as well is that we'll get closer and closer to labor. This way we get closer and closer, or increase the amount of prothrombin activator that we can make in order to get to insoluble fibrin. Now, if we go over here to the extrinsic pathway, we can see tissue trauma exposes the blood to the tissue factor because the damaged cells will release tissue factor, which speeds up this process. We get to factor 7 with tissue factor, will then catalyze that conversion of factor 10 with calcium into the production of prothrombin activator. So if I'm bleeding out, then I want to do this extrinsic pathway. If I'm not, then I'm going to go this way. All right, then that's going to take us to phase 2, where we're activating prothrombin into thrombin in the presence of prothrombin activator, and then we can see how thrombin is also going to activate fibrinogen in its insoluble form, factor 1, and then it's also going to, with calcium, cause factor 13 to cause the fibrin molecules to stick together. Without this factor 13, then the fibrin, sure, it's made, but it's not going to link together. So it's really important that we have that as well. Okay, so I think that goes through everything on that in your study guide. Okay, so put that. You've probably seen what happens when the fibrin has stuck everything together. Looks like this. And then plasma leaks out. So you can see plasma becomes gel-like and traps the formed elements. And then the fibrin molecules are tightly woven together and will trap all of the cells, not just the red blood cells, but white blood cells. And the platelets were already sticking. All right. Then if we take a look at this, there was a question about vitamin K. The clotting factors are made by the liver, and what do the clotting factors need? Well, many of them need vitamin K in order to produce them. Vitamin K is made by your colonic bacteria. And so you had the question about why is vitamin K important in blood clotting. At birth, infants are given a shot of vitamin K. What is the purpose of the shot? Well, since our colonic bacteria produce it, babies don't have bacteria in their colons. They don't get inoculated with bacteria with their intestinal flora until either they pass through the birth canal and are exposed to the mother's normal flora there, or they start nursing, or just a matter of their little brothers and sisters kissing on them, or their big brothers and sisters kissing on them, and things like that. And so it takes a while to be inoculated with our bacteria that are going to cause or produce our vitamin K. So by giving the babies the vitamin K in the beginning, then we don't have to worry about hemorrhage that may happen in a newborn. And so then the liver has that available to it until the bacteria make it on their own. So that's why we do that. This slide just gives you the names of the different factors, where they come from. You can see they're all plasma proteins, and what is their source? Primarily their source is the liver, and then what pathway they're involved with and their functions there. Okay, after you have a clot forming. Oh, there is a question that says, what's the difference between a thrombus and an embolus? And I have that later on in another spot, but I'll just tell you right now. A thrombus is a clot in an unbroken blood vessel. So it's a clot that we don't want, that for whatever reason formed, primarily due to lack of movement. People that have broken legs. You know what, guys? I'm going to put in the pulmonary embolism video. You'll love that. I'll put you a link to that. Write me a note. Okay. So a thrombus then is a clot that forms in an unbroken blood vessel. When it breaks loose and goes somewhere else, then it becomes an embolus. And so that's the difference. Thrombus is a clot we don't want, and an embolus is a clot that we didn't want that went somewhere else. And like I said, I'm going to post that video, and hopefully you'll like it. My students love it. And we love it at my house because we're all weird anatomy people at my house. My kids love that kind of thing. Well, they're grown-ups, so they can be weird like their mom. Okay, so once we have the clot, then we need to get rid of it. So we need clot retraction and repair, and then fibrinolysis to take place. So platelets contain actin and myosin, and so they are able to pull the clot together, reduce the size of the clot, squeezing out the serum. Platelet-derived growth factors will stimulate the rebuilding of the epithelium. It's really important with epithelium. You have a scaffolding on which to build, and so by having that clot present, it does allow the epithelial cells or the endothelial cells to grow back, and then repair of the rest of the vessel occurs. But without that clot, it's really difficult for the repair to happen. And then once the repair has begun, then we need to break down that clot. And so we have fibrinolysis taking place, and then you put in the study guide the substances that are involved in that. I don't require my students to know that, so it's not here. So if you have any questions about that, then please make sure you email me. All right, so why don't we have clots happening all the time? Well, the first and most important thing is swift removal of clotting factors. And because our blood is flowing, and that's what we want to make sure that our blood is flowing all the time. So people that have broken legs or some other body part that's immobilized will typically tend to develop clots. My mom had one, had to be on warfarin for a while, until her clot finally dissolved. So that's the most important thing, is keep your blood flowing. I always tell my students, get out and play Chinese fire drill when you're riding on a long car trip. So we have some other substances within our bloodstream that will help inhibit those activated clotting factors, like antithrombin 3, protein C, and heparin, like where's listed in your study guide. And then what keeps them from starting in the first place, besides the blood flowing all the time, is that we have a smooth endothelium. As long as the endothelium hasn't ruptured, then there's no exposed collagen for the platelets to stick to. And then we have those antithrombic substances. Vitamin E and oxygen is also a very potent anticoagulant. I have a friend that had to have surgery. They had to do fusion of his vertebrae in his neck. And anytime you do anything with the vertebrae in your neck, it's a very delicate surgery. And they have to pull, they go in from the front and they have to pull all of your blood vessels and nerves and everything out of the way and label them all. And so as they were in doing the fusion of the bodies of the vertebrae in his neck, the surgeon nicked one of the blood vessels and he started to bleed. Now, before you have any surgery, if you've been on a blood thinner, they'll typically remove you from that, take that away from you for about 2 weeks before you have surgery. So, you know, if you're on Coumadin or something like that, they'll take you off that before you have surgery so you don't have hemorrhage. And so my friend had not been on any pharmaceutical that would have been an antithrombic substance, but he had been taking garlic. And apparently garlic, too, has vitamin E and stuff in it that makes you very anticoagulant. And so he bled, and he bled, and he bled, and he bled, and they could not get his bleeding to stop. And he bled out 14 units of blood. And the surgeon was about to go tell his wife that they were going to lose him, that they just couldn't keep him and get the bleeding stopped. And then it stopped. And so after surgery, and the surgeon was able to go in and talk to my friend. He said, "Oh my goodness, what's the deal?" You know, and he's, "Well, I've been taking garlic," and they're like, "We didn't even think about the fact that you'd been taking garlic," because he had had a heart attack before that, and so he was making sure that his blood was thin, and so he almost died. So it's important, not only do we inform our physicians that, you know, of any medications that we're taking if we have a bleeding situation, but any homeopathic treatments that we might be taking are just as important to let our people know, you know, our medical care providers know what's going on with us. Here it is. There's a thrombus. There's an embolus. Atherosclerosis, we do have a little section on that, which we'll do in another video. But atherosclerosis can also cause clots, severe burns, and inflammation, just anything that's going to cause aggregation of cells. And here's the slow-flowing blood. Bedridden individuals, long rides. Several years ago, there was a reporter during the Iraq War, I believe it was, and he had gone out with the soldiers in the troop transporters, and those troop transporters are very, very small and very tight quarters, and you have to sit with your knees bent up around your chin, and so he had sat for many hours like that, and he got out of the car and then passed out because he had an embolism that ended up in his death, and so that's kind of sad. Well, it was really sad, not kind of sad. Prevention of thromboembolic conditions through aspirin, dicumarol, or warfarin. Okay, aspirin. Nope, not anymore. I guess you could still take that, but as far as aspirin is concerned, some of you may be aware of taking it as a prophylactic, taking a baby aspirin, 82.5 milligram aspirin every day to prevent heart attacks. No, it's not a recommended protocol anymore, just because of the risk of bleeding. So if you've got grandparents or somebody that takes a baby aspirin a day and hasn't heard the news, they should talk to their healthcare provider about that, because they shouldn't be taking it anymore. And that's just recently come out in the past, month or so, as far as when I heard about it. Okay, so bleeding disorders, thrombocytopenia, lack of platelets, spontaneous bleeding can occur. Any kind of impaired liver function will result in procoagulants not getting made, or vitamin K, lack of that, or of course our genetic disorders of clotting like the hemophilias A, B, and C, and then von Willebrand syndrome. All right, that will do it for this section.